In this video, we're going to be learning about cropping images in React with an NPM package called React Easy Crop. This is the project that we're going to be building. As you can see, we have several pictures on this page. If I go ahead and click one of these pictures, you're presented with an image crop dialog. From this dialog, you can zoom into a picture using your mouse, or you can go ahead and use the slider below. We also have different aspect ratios you can select. So you can see that these square boxes over here change depending on the aspect ratio that I select. If I select 1:2, you can see it's really narrow. Like 16:9, then we have this wider view. Let's go ahead and do something interesting with this picture over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be zooming in over here. I'm going to zoom in right onto these tires. Go ahead and click crop, and then we get this interesting picture. You can go ahead and click it and then edit it. This remembers the zoom level that we had and the aspect ratio that was selected. Once I fine tune it, I can go ahead and click that crop button again. I can do the same thing with other images over here. Go ahead and grab this Lotus picture, maybe kind of zoom in on it, click crop. The other functionality that we're going to be building is the ability to reset it. So if I click reset, that picture goes back to what it was. And then this picture over here, the Porsche, perfect example of being able to just select one car. So we're going to select that Porsche, click crop, and then we have that single image. And then some other examples here are the 16:9, which I think look really great over here with this Lamborghini. And kind of just zoom out, get it perfect in the shot, and then click crop. So this is the tool that we'll be building in this video. We'll start the project by doing npx create react app and naming the project image cropping with React Easy Crop. We can then open the application in Visual Studio Code by going to the directory and then typing code dot, or within Visual Studio, finding the folder, clicking the open button, and opening that project. So for the project setup over here, I just have Visual Studio Code on my left and Chrome on the right. Then we'll go ahead and start the application up. You can open up the terminal by hitting Control-tilde on your keyboard, or you can go up to the menu, go to terminal, say new terminal, and then all we want to do is run npm start. For this application, we're going to have a list of pictures. So we're going to put those pictures in our public directory. And I'm just going to create a folder called images. And inside that images, I'm going to go ahead and drag in a few images that I have, the same ones from the demo. You can use any images you like for this project. These are the images that I'll be using. Before we go any further with the code, let's go ahead and install React Easy Crop. So from our terminal over here, I'm going to click the little plus button. This terminal is still running the app. This terminal over here will do the installation. All we got to do is npm I react easy crop, and I'm going to install a specific version of it. You can install the latest one, and this will most likely work. However, if you have any issues, fall back to 3.5.2. Let's go to app.js and start creating our application. So we'll jump to the app.js file in the src directory. I'm going to close the terminal over here, also close the sidebar. And then what we'll do is we'll just delete everything that we don't need. I'm going to delete everything inside of app, and I'll also delete the logo over there. And inside the app, we'll just put a div for now that says hi. And that's all we're going to have on the screen at the moment. Inside of app.js, we're going to go ahead and create a data structure to represent the data that we're going to be showing on the screen. I'm going to call this initial variable called initData, which stands for initial data. It's going to be an array of objects, and those objects will have three properties each. One will be the ID, the image URL, which will be images/r1.png, and another property called cropped image URL, which will be null. And then we'll just repeat that for their other images that we have as well. And we can just duplicate that. And then using a nice little trick inside Visual Studio Code, what I can do is create multiple cursors and update various values. So for example, I can just change those to 2. Then over here, I can select that one over here and just hit Command D on Mac or Control D on Windows. So I'm going to do the same thing over here and just change that to 4. And we have our initial data. We're then going to take that initial data and set it as the state on our app. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use hooks. So we're going to import use state from React. Then inside the application over here, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a constant. We're going to extract cars from our use state and the set cars method. And we're going to say use state, and we're going to pass in that initial data that we have. Next, we'll go ahead and use our state information. Within our return over here, we're going to use that to display the images. So we'll grab those cars and we're going to do a map, and each item is a car. And what we'll do is we'll put a div and then we'll close a div over there. And then inside the div, we'll put an img. And what I'll show you over here is the fact that you can see it's better formatted because I'm using Prettier and automatically formatted it for me. Also make that image tag self-closing. And then on the image tag, we're going to add an src. And that src will take in the car and the image URL. And then if I click save, you can see the images. And we're just going to do a bit of styling so that they don't take up so much space. On the div above our image over here, we're going to add a class name, and we're going to call that image card. Then what we'll do is we'll go inside of our app CSS, and inside that app CSS, we can just delete all that content. We don't need that. Then we'll just add an image card over here selector, and we're going to do text align center, which won't make an immediate change. Then on the image card, we're going to select the img tag, and we'll just set the width to 600 pixels. And now the images fit nicely on the screen. We'll go back to our app.js over here, and we'll just take care of this little error over here that mentions we're missing an alt tag. Next, let's handle the on-click event that'll be fired when we click on an image. So what we're going to need for that is another piece of state called selected car. So we'll go ahead and add a selected car and a set selected car. And that state is just going to be set to null. Then inside the image, we're going to go ahead and add an onClick method. And we'll just define an arrow function. That arrow function will go ahead and set the selected car equal to the car that we get from our map function. If we have a selected car, we're going to go ahead and display a new component called image crop dialog. And if we don't have it, we're just going to return null. So now when I click save, we're going to get an error. So to resolve this error, we're going to go to our src directory and add a brand new component called image crop dialog, and we can call that JS. To speed up my imports, I'm using React Simple Snippets, which is a great plugin. And you can see how quick it is to go ahead and kind of just create a simple file. And inside this simple file, I'll just put a div here and we'll say crop and save it. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go back inside our app.js over here and we're going to import our image crop. And now our screen will be working. And if I click on any one of these images, you'll see it just says crop. In our HTML over here for our image crop dialog, we're going to pass a few properties in. So the first property we're going to pass in is the identifier of our selected car. We can pass in the selected car.id. Then we'll grab the image URL and we'll get that as well from our selected car. I'll save that so that it formats it. And then additionally, what we're going to do is we're going to also grab a few other properties that we need too. We're going to have this initial property for our zoom, our crop, and our aspect ratio. If you recall, whenever we clicked on one of these images, it always remembered what those values were. So that information will be on our selected car. So we're going to grab our selected car crop. Then we'll also grab our selected car.zoom. And then lastly, the aspect ratio that we've set. By default, these values will be null, which is okay. And we have our aspect. And these are the values that we'll be passing in. Let's go into our image crop dialog. And now that we have all those properties that we're passing in, let's get them over here. So we'll get our identifier, our image URL, our crop init, our zoom init, and our aspect init. Now we're going to use the properties that we passed in. We're going to check if the zoom init is equal to null. If it is equal to null, we're going to set the zoom init equal to 1. We're going to check our crop init as well. And if that value is equal to null, we're going to say that the crop init is equal to an object that has an x position of 0 and a y position of 0. So this is the crop and where it starts. And then lastly, we'll check our aspect init. And if our aspect init is equal to null, we're going to set it to an aspect that we're going to define in a little array called aspect ratio, and we're going to select the first item in that array. So aspect ratios doesn't exist, so we're going to get an error. So at the top of this file, let's go quickly define that little array that we have. Inside that array, it's going to look like this. We're going to say it's equal to this array, and we're going to have values. So 4 divided by 3 is going to be one of them. Then we'll have a text value that we display in our dropdown. So that will just be 4 over 3 like that. And I'll define 2 more of those so that we have several different aspect ratios for our project. We'll have a 16 divided by 9 or 16 by 9. And then for fun, we just have a half over here, 1 by 2 and 1 by 2. Now, when we save, we won't get that error anymore. Let's get to work on displaying that crop dialog. So this HTML that we have over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave an outer div. And then inside this div over here, we're going to have another div that's going to represent the backdrop. So when the dialog shows, the back of the screen will go all black. It's the same screen, but we just have this thing called a backdrop. Then below that backdrop, we're going to put another div, and that div over there will be our crop container. So all of this is setting up so that we can show the cropping container. And then inside here, we are finally going to show that crop. So let's go ahead and import our cropper. So we'll import cropper from React Easy Crop. Then what we're going to do inside our crop container, we'll define our cropper here. I won't click save just yet. One other thing we're going to do is below our cropper, we'll add another div, and this div over here is going to contain all the buttons and drop downs controls that we want for our page. We're going to give it a class name of controls. And this is where all the controls will go. Our cropper is going to require a bunch of properties to be passed in, and some of those properties will be coming from our state. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and define some state that our cropper will be using. So these initial values that we passed in and set, we're going to be setting state for each and every single one of them. So for our zoom over here, we'll go ahead and set some state for that. We'll have a zoom, a set zoom, and that will be equal to use state, and it'll take in the zoom init. Then we'll do exactly the same thing for the crop. We'll have a set crop is equal to use state, and it's going to get that default crop value. And if it's not set, it'll be set to y0 and x0. The other one is our aspect ratio. So that'll be aspect, and set aspect is equal to the use state, and we'll get our aspect init. One last piece of state that we're going to want to track is the cropped area pixels. We'll go ahead and define that as well. Before we continue, let's go ahead and just resolve a couple of issues here. I've noticed that I didn't actually destructure passing into my image crop dialog function here. So just make sure to put those curly braces so actual destructuring happens. And then back inside the app.js over here, inside the image crop, we're expecting an image URL. And over here, I called it image. So I'm just going to rename that to image URL. And lastly, one thing we could do is just quickly resolve this error over here, where it says that we need a key, a unique key for our list. And on our div, what we're going to do is just say the key is equal to car.id. Then hit refresh, and that error will no longer be there. Well, let's go do the minimum required to go show our crop dialog. So inside our cropper over here, what we're going to do is go ahead and pass in the image. We're going to give it the image URL that we pass in. We're going to give it the zoom value, which is just equal to zoom, crop, which is equal to crop. And it requires a function called onCropChange. And we're going to make that equal to a function that we'll define inside here. We'll just define a function. We aren't going to make it do anything yet. We'll say const onCropChange is equal to, and we'll make it an arrow function that doesn't do anything yet. So just an empty arrow function, and pass that in over here. Click save. Now we'll go ahead and just click on one of these images and represent it with our dialog. We can't do anything with it yet because we're missing a few methods. We can't dismiss it or click it. With the crop dialog, you're supposed to be able to drag this side to side in order to select your crop. Well, that's controlled by the crop and the onCropChange. So to illustrate this real quick, we have our X over here, and if we change the value to 100 and we click save and you click refresh and then click on that, you can see that this box has moved. If you put it at 0 and hit refresh, the box will then be in the middle. In order to drag the box around, all we have to do is update the crop value onCropChange. OnCropChange takes in the crop. We just have to call set crop for our state and pass in the crop. Then when we update our application and we use it, we'll be able to drag this box side to side to select our crop value. But let's also take a look at being able to zoom in and out of our picture. The way we can do this is there's an event called onZoomChange, and we're going to create a function called onZoomChange, and we'll implement that just above over here. So we'll do const onZoomChange, and kind of like our crop as well, it's going to take in a zoom value. And then all we have to do is call setZoom since we're tracking that state, pass in the zoom value. Now, when we go back to our application, and I'm just using a trackpad here, so I'm pinch zooming to go in and pinch zooming to go out. I can move this around to zoom to very particular parts of this picture if I want to. To complement our zooming, we're also going to add a slider. But before we move forward, let's add a little bit of styling because frankly, this doesn't look too nice. So let's go over to our app CSS, and we're going to style a part of our application. So we created something called a backdrop. Now I'll remind you where that is. We go back to our backdrop over here. So we added a div and we called it backdrop, this div over here. So we're going to take that and we're going to go ahead and add a style. We'll call that backdrop. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a div that kind of encompasses the whole screen. So what we're going to do with that is we're going to position it fixed, and then we'll set a background color of black. Then all we're going to do is we're going to take this thing and you can kind of think of it like stretching it. We're going to stretch it to the top, we're going to stretch it to the left so that it just takes up the entire screen. We're just setting all these values to 0 and then click save. And now this backdrop is hiding our main part of our application with all our pictures. And then we'll also go ahead and add styles for our crop container over here. We'll go back into our app CSS over here, and kind of like the backdrop, we're also going to position this fixed. Then we're going to be using these values once again, and we're going to say from the top. So start from the top, take up the entire left, take up the entire right. But at the bottom, leave 80 pixels from the bottom. So what that means is it's going to be a gap down over here. And that's where we're going to put the controls, such as the slider. Then we're going to go back to our image crop dialog. Inside our controls area, we're going to go ahead and add a div. We'll add an input of type range. And we're going to set several values for this. We're going to say min is equal to 1, max is equal to 3, so we can zoom 3 times. The step, which is each little increment of the slider, will be 0.1. The value we're going to grab from our state, which is the zoom. Then we're also going to add an event to capture when the value changes, and that's called onInput. And onInput will take in the following function. We're going to give it the E over there, which represents the event that was fired. And then we're going to call the onZoom change that we created earlier. And all we have to do is say e.target.value. And then the last thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add a class over here as well, so we can add some styling. And we're just going to call that slider. Now, when we click save, it's not going to show up yet because we need to make the controls over here show up. Let's also go ahead and add a class on this div that contains the slider. And we're just going to call that controls upper area. Then we can go ahead and go back to our CSS over here. And we'll say controls. So we'll start with the controls. We'll start with the outer div up here and grab those controls. And we're just going to make that div viewable on the screen. We'll do that by positioning it on the screen. So we're going to call position over here. We're going to do fixed once again. The bottom of this will be 80, 0 pixels. As you know, the other one goes down to 80. So this one will go up from 0. And we'll also set the height to 80 pixels. So now our slider shows up. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do dot controls dash upper area, and we're going to do this to make it aligned center. So we're going to do text align center. Then lastly, we're going to grab that slider and style it itself. So we'll grab the slider and we might as well set its width to 50%. And that'll make the slider a little bit bigger. Now, if I zoom over here at my mouse and I zoom in like this, you're going to see the slider change. You can also grab the slider and you can see it increments little by little there, zooming in and zooming out. We have our slider working and showing up on the screen. Next, let's go ahead and implement our aspect ratio dropdown. We're going to put that right after the input over here. So we'll use a select element. Inside the select element, it will have options, and we're going to map them from our aspect ratios that we defined above. So I'm going to call each one of these a ratio, and then we'll create an option. It will need a key value. That key value will be equal to the ratio.text value. You recall our ratios have two values, as a value and a text value. We're going to use the text value as its unique value. Then we'll set the value equal to the ratio.value, which will be a number. Then we have to determine whether or not it was selected, and it will be selected if the ratio.value is equal to the aspect.value. Now the aspect.value is going to be a number, so that's why we use that. And that's coming from our state over here. As you can see, there's our aspect. And then over here, we just check if it's one of the selected options. Then the only thing we have left to do over here is to actually set the text value. So we have an empty dropdown. And then inside our options over here, all we have to say is ratio.text. Close that up, hit save. And now we have a dropdown that has values inside it. Then we're going to go ahead and implement the onChange for the select over here. We're going to create a new function called onAspectChange, and that onAspectChange will define above. So we'll just copy that name over there. And then up over here, we'll do const onAspectChange is equal to, we're going to get an event argument. Then from that, we're going to grab the value, and we're going to say the value is equal to e.target.value. Then we'll do const ratio, and we're going to find within the aspect ratios, using this value that we get back, we're going to look through this list over here to find which one it is. We'll do aspect ratios, and we're going to use a method called find that takes in an arrow function. We're going to give it the ratio. We're going to say ratio.value is equal to the value. Now this value over here is a string, so I'm just going to do truthy lookup, where it just checks. One is a string, one is a number, but they're still equal. Then what's going to happen is we'll do a set aspect, and we're going to give it the ratio. Now down in our cropper, we haven't actually used the ratio yet. So all we have to do over here is grab our aspect, and then we're going to grab the aspect that's stored in the state, but we're going to grab the number and then store that there. Now, when this value changes, it's going to change the aspect that we're looking at. So this is 16 by 9, which fits perfectly. If you go half, you can see you get this smaller box like this that we can zoom around on. And then 4 by 3 obviously is this format over here. And you can see our zoom is maintained even though we change the aspect. Next, we're going to go ahead and add the buttons to the bottom of the screen. So that'll be pretty simple. We're going to find our controls area over here, minimize the controls upper area, and we're going to add a new section beside it called buttons. We'll give that a class name equal to button area. We'll save that, and then inside there, we're just going to add 3 buttons. We're going to add the cancel, the reset, and the crop button. And then you can see those buttons appearing down here. Let's go ahead and style those buttons. So we'll go to our app CSS, and then inside our app CSS, we'll just add a couple of styles. We're going to add one for the button itself, and we'll add one for the button area. The button area style that we're going to add is just to align the buttons centered on the screen. So now you can see the buttons are centered. And then the button itself will make the buttons look nicer and add some spacing. So we'll just do a margin left of 10 pixels. And then we'll do the same thing with the right as well. And then we'll also we can add a background color if we like, and make the background color black. Now they kind of disappear, and then we can add a color and make that white. And if we wanted to play around a little bit more with it, we could add a border with 1 pixel, make that solid and yellow. And then our buttons have these nice little yellow outline to them. We could even go ahead and make those buttons a little bit bigger. So our font size for the buttons, we can set that to 20 pixels. And then just to make some spacing between those 2 different areas, we could say in our button area, the margin top is 10 pixels. And then we get a bit of a gap, or maybe go with 20 right there. We have a bigger gap between them. Now our buttons are larger, a little easier to read. Now let's go ahead and start adding some functionality to our buttons. Let's implement the cancel. So for that button, we're going to add an on click, and then we're going to fire a method called on cancel. And on cancel is going to come from the parent component, the app. We're going to pass that in as a property over there. So right over here in the destructuring, we're getting the on cancel. And then inside app.js, inside the image crop dialog, we go ahead and pass on cancel is equal to on cancel. And then we'll go ahead and implement on cancel. And then on cancel is equal to just an arrow function that doesn't take any arguments. And all we have to do is call selected car and pass in null. Now, when we click cancel, it'll dismiss the dialog. Next, let's take a look at how we're going to be cropping the actual image when we click the crop button. So first thing that we're going to do is go back to our image crop dialog. We're going to want to track the cropped pixels. So this is going to be this area over here. It's going to return an object that represents which part of the screen or which part of the image that we're going to be cropping. In order to do this, the cropper over here has an event that it fires called onCropComplete. And the onCropComplete, we're just going to create a function. We'll define that function above over here. We're going to call it const onCropComplete, and that will just be another arrow function that we define. And it takes in two values. One is the cropped area. So we're going to pass in the cropped area. And then the one that we're interested in is the cropped area pixels. And then we're just going to use our state, because remember we're tracking state for that. So we're just going to use our method over here called set cropped area pixels and pass in the cropped area pixels that we have. Next, let's go ahead and set up our click event for the crop. So we'll say on click equals on crop. So we'll go ahead and implement that above, and it doesn't take any arguments in. Okay, so to get the actual image, the actual cropped image, and to get that on the client side, we're going to actually create a brand new file over here. And we're going to call that cropimage.js. And we're going to pass into it basically this code over here that I pasted in. So I'm going to have a direct link to it inside of the description. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. Basically what it's doing is we're using HTML5 canvas, drawing the image to it, and then cropping those using that cropped area pixel to figure out what that image is. To save time, we'll just paste this in over here, and you can copy that code from the direct link or from the project that will be on GitHub. Back inside our image crop dialog at the very top of our file, we're going to go ahead and import from that file. So we're importing the get cropped image. Now we can scroll down to the onCrop and make use of that method. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and call that method and get the return value, which is going to be a cropped image URL. Now that method uses async and await. So we're going to have to call await over here and then call get cropped image. Get cropped image takes in the original image URL and takes in the cropped area pixels from our state. Now, since this is an await method over here, our method needs to be marked with async. Once we got our cropped image URL over here, we're going to want to notify the app.js to update the state. So the way we're going to do that is the app.js is going to be passing in a property, a method that we're going to be utilizing. So over here inside our destructuring, we'll go ahead and add a new method that we're going to destructure. That new method will be set cropped image 4. And then we're going to kind of define it here, but we'll do it kind of backwards. So we're going to go down over here onto our on crop. We're going to come here and we call set cropped image 4. And that method will take in the identifier of the image that we modified. It'll take in the crop, the zoom, the aspect, and the cropped image URL. Now we could just give it the cropped image URL, but the next time I open up the picture, I want to have the correct aspect, the zoom, the crop, so that we can modify that crop if we choose to. So now I'm going to go ahead and copy the name of that method that we're going to be defining in our app.js. We'll go back to our app.js and remember the image crop dialog over here. We're going to be passing in that method. Then up above, we can define that new function that we have here. Now this arrow function will be taking in a bunch of properties. It will have our ID, our crop, our zoom, our aspect, and the cropped image URL. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our cars list and make a copy of it. So we'll say new cars list is equal to, and we're going to give it the cars over there. So we're making a copy of that list. Then next, we can go ahead and get that car index. We want to find out where that car is in the list. So we'll say cars.find index, and that takes in an arrow function and we'll look for that particular car using its identifier that we pass in over here. Then once we find it, we need to find the actual car. So we can use that cars list that we have and go and find it by the index that we just found here. So this will give us the object that we have. Then what we can do is we can define a new car. And what we're going to do is make a copy of the car that we have right over here. Because remember in React state, you're not supposed to mutate it. So here we're making a copy of the car. Then we're going to modify the cropped image URL, the crop, the zoom, and the aspect. So we're basically saying grab all the properties that are on the car and then update them to these values for the ones that defined. Then inside our new, I'll need to put an equals over there. Then our new car list, our new cars list. What we're going to do is find the one that's in that list, the car by car index, and then go ahead and set that to the car. Then all we have to do is call set cars, give it that new cars list, and lastly set selected car. We're going to set that to null so that once you crop, the dialog goes away. Now this may look really complicated, and all of this is just to make sure that you're not mutating the state. And if it's something you haven't seen before, it's a pattern you'll get used to. Now, when we open up an image over here and we zoom in and we click that crop button, it doesn't show the cropped image just yet. However, if I open it up again, it remembers exactly where I was. So I'm on the back of the car there. And then when I click it, it still opens up on the back of the car. So how do we get this working? Well, really simple. Inside our app.js over here, we have our src. We have two values on our car. We have the cropped image URL. So if it is there, we're going to show it. So we'll do this. And then if it's not there, then we're just going to show the regular image URL. Click save. And now you can see it's showing the cropped images. Let's go click this one, choose something different, crop it. And there we go. We see that it's working. We can do the same thing with this one too, just to double check. And yes, they're all working now. Let's go implement reset image. We'll define a function called reset image. It'll be a function that just takes in a single identifier. And all we need to do is call set cropped image, give it the ID, and the other properties will be set to null by default since we're not providing them. Inside our image crop dialog, we'll pass in reset image. Inside that component, we'll go ahead and extract that property. Then below on the click event for reset, we're going to define as a new function called onResetImage. And we'll just define onResetImage above over here. Inside onResetImage, we're just going to call resetImage, and we're just going to give it the identifier. Then if we go to one of our images over here, open it up, click the reset button, you'll see that it gets reset. If I change that aspect ratio to half, zoom all the way to the side over here, and then zoom in, what you're going to notice is that when I crop it, we're going to get that picture. But when I click reset, our zoom is reset, our aspect ratio is reset, and the position of this cropping is also reset. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe, like, and share.